responsible sourcing is a more appropriate term to use, at least in the industry today, versus ethical sourcing or sustainable sourcing, because sustainability, I feel itself, is a word which I sometimes struggle to understand why it is used for precious stones, which are not technically sustainable because it's a finite product. Companies in this industry, whether they are gemstone manufacturers or jewelry brands, are legacy, are multi-generational. And I think at the core of it is self-realization, understanding and knowing who you are and what makes you tick and what resonates with your customers. Coming from the consumer's point of view, as I still consider myself a consumer to a large extent, is to keep it simple, really, because I think the more complicated the narrative, the more customer confusion it's going to create. So I feel like stones like spinels and garnets are the perfect love child of colored stones and diamonds in that respect. And I'm wearing a spinel right now, and I mean, just look at this. There's no special lighting in my room right now. There's a lamp a little far away, and it's just the computer light. But this is a Mahenge spinel from Tanzania, and it's like a light catcher. I find that they just grab light from whatever little light source that's there and just reflect it back to your eye. And garnets are the same. These are Savorite garnets, and a lot of people think they're emeralds, but they're not.
So with that in mind, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today our speaker, Ms. Nisha Goyal Sethi.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So Richa, I'd like to just deep dive into something which Apurva sir just kind of laid the foundation for, and he gave a very wonderful introduction. And he started off by saying that you are a creative strategist, a journalist, a storyteller, specializing in gemstones, diamonds, mining, contemporary and vintage jewelry, and also a curator of educational gem and jewelry travel experiences. Now, before this, Apurva briefly touched upon this, that you spent about 20 years in aviation, marketing, and tourism. And now you just finished writing a book. Have you finished writing it?
I finished writing it. The book is done, manuscript is done, editing is done. I mean, literally, I submitted the edited manuscript, gosh, like 2-3 days ago. So it's done.
Great. So now that you've finished writing this book, I want to ask you this question, Richa. And this is coming just to help us understand how this journey has been, which is that how does one know from not knowing in the gem and jewelry industry at a stage to being where you've commissioned to write a book in just a span of maybe 3-4 years? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it sounds actually crazy and unbelievable. I mean, I remember my first interaction with, quote unquote, the industry at the ICA Congress in Jaipur in 2017, which was, I think, September or October 2017. And I didn't know anyone in the industry at that time, and no one knew me. So to then be commissioned by a company like Gemfields in 2020 to write this book is just, it's insane. I mean, if someone had told me at that time this would happen, I would have said never in a million years. But I think the journey really started around 2010. I was trying to buy a ruby necklace, and the person selling the necklace, and I think most people especially in the colored gemstone industry, if you ask them what triggered for you to enter this industry, will have a similar story of almost getting cheated or something happening. And so this guy who was selling me this ruby necklace claimed they were Burmese, untreated. But when he quoted me the price, it sounded too good to be true, so I didn't buy them. And I later found out they were glass-filled Madagascar rubies. So, but that, how close I came to being cheated was it triggered a quest to learn more about colored stones. And to cut a long story short, around that time, I moved to Singapore, met a French gemologist in Singapore who wanted to go and see the sapphire mines in Sri Lanka. I was in aviation, marketing, and tourism. And I said, oh, I know everyone in Sri Lanka. I'll organize the trip. I knew no one in mining. And none of the jewelers that I knew as a consumer had even gone to a mine or knew anything about a mine. So it took me a year to sort of curate an educational trip and put it together. And, the first trip I think was 2014. And it just, I think the best way to describe is I became like a gemstone addict and just living from one hit to the next. And I think most people who are in this industry for a long period of time do relate to that and do describe themselves as having fallen under the mineral spell of precious stones. But the Instagram account only happened end of 2016. And I only made it public in 2017. So it, even though I have kind of, and I enrolled in a GIA distance education course, hence being a GIA alumni, because I was trying to figure out because I was still in my corporate life. So I think GIA has been an important part of that journey in terms of getting formal education, right? Alongside these crazy experiences. Normally people start as a student and then eventually get to a mine. I started the other way. I started at a mine and then sort of worked my way back towards the industry. Yeah, and the book, coming to your question, I mean, the book is basically a collection of short adventure stories. Each one is based on actual events and real people related to colored stones from Africa. And the reason it was commissioned, the idea came from the CEO of Gemfields, Sean Gilbertson. It was his idea. And the idea, it happened in 2020. July 2020 or May 2020 was a very different time in our lives. There was this sense of morality that was hanging over all of us. And it came from a humbling realization that a lot of let's say around 80% of the colored stones today come from Africa, freshly mined. And a lot of these deposits in Africa have only been discovered in the last 60 to 100 years. And these historical moments that have happened in the last 13, 20, 50, 60 years, beyond technical articles, which tend to focus on the stone and the deposit and the geology and the gemology, but the human angle of how these deposits were found or the human stories behind these stones hasn't really been documented ever. And the humbling realization was that if these stories are not documented, in a couple of decades, they will be lost forever. So the first objective was to document these stories, but it's a paperback. It's not a coffee table book, and it's meant for the end consumer as well as the trade. So even someone who doesn't know that emeralds are green and rubies are red should be able to buy this book, fall in love, and learn and take away something that they can easily digest, a little nugget of knowledge related to a whole range of colored stones that come from Africa today. So it was to document these historical moments, but document them in a fun way, kind of like, I hate to use this term, but for the lack of a better term, kind of like Indiana Jones meets James Bond or something similar. But and documenting the color and life that are colored gemstones, and also that is Africa. At least that's my attempt. So I've been writing this book for 3 years, non-stop, every single day, including Saturdays and Sundays. It's been my life. It's been my little parallel universe that I would escape to.
Wow. Well, just listening to that is incredible. I'm sure it has been a mammoth task, and now to get to a stage that, the manuscript is finally done, I'm sure you must be feeling a lot relieved.
No, incredibly relieved and also feeling a sense of loss because I don't have that book to, I don't have that universe to go into and hang around with all these characters who are all real and most of them still working in the industry. And, so you better ask me the next question. Otherwise, we'll spend this whole webinar talking about the book.
Great. Richa, you actually touched upon the most important point that I wanted to ask you about, which is that in today's day and age, especially around colored stones and, everything that we deal with, we hear a lot about ethical sourcing, right? And young consumers, especially, the Gen Zs, the millennials, we have all these cohorts, marketing cohorts, they are said to have been choosing brands that genuinely embrace responsible sourcing when it comes to all sort of product categories across not just gem and jewelry industry. Now, for an unassuming person like me, could you explain what ethical sourcing, what responsible sourcing means, and maybe dwell a little bit into how does the gem and jewelry industry, in your opinion, measure up to these expectations around ethical sourcing or responsible sourcing?
Yeah, I mean, those are really big words and words that are being thrown around a lot these days. And I think ethical, responsible, sustainable, those are like the top sort of three hits in terms of the words and the terms that are used. And I recently wrote an article on responsible sourcing of colored gemstones, and I've written extensively on this topic. I mean, I think everyone has their own definition of what is responsible sourcing. And I think that's what also creates a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't claim to be an expert, but from whatever research I've done and based on my understanding, I feel that responsible sourcing is a more appropriate term to use, at least in the industry today, versus ethical sourcing or sustainable sourcing, because sustainability, I feel itself is a word which I sometimes struggle to understand why it is used for precious stones, which are not technically sustainable because it's a finite product. Once that deposit is mined out, it's over. So I feel like one needs to also then understand what exactly are you saying when you're talking about sustainability. And I'll come to that later on, but I want to give you an example of someone who tried to deconstruct these definitions. It's a person I had interviewed, Feriel Zerouki, who is recently become the president of the World Diamond Council. She's from De Beers and she established this incredible program called Gem Fair in Sierra Leone, one of their senior leaders. And she explained that, responsible sourcing, and she's, of course, also been on the board of SIBJO and the Responsible Jewelry Council. And so she explained this to me as responsible source essentially means meeting international standards. Ethical source, according to her, it takes it a step further. So businesses need to be international standards. So you have the responsible sourcing and then you ensure best practices in relation to social responsibilities, human rights, labor practices. Sustainably sourced means that businesses apply all of that, plus have mechanisms in place to provide enduring socioeconomic benefits, environmental protection and longevity. So it is sustainable beyond the life of that mine. I mean, when I think about responsibility and responsible behavior in the industry, I feel it is a little bit like a layered cake, right? So when you have a layered cake, you need to have your foundation of that cake first before you start building on top to make like a 3 or 4 layered cake, before you do your frosting and your decoration and your cherry on top. And that basic foundation of the responsibility cake has to be, in my mind, the integrity of what you're selling. It comes to because with responsible sourcing, we tend to, in our minds, think outward before we think inward. We tend to think, let's go to the mine, let's go to the source, where are we getting our stones from? But I think before you go to that phase 2 or phase 3, you need to start with yourself. Am I disclosing when I'm selling something, I'm selling an inventory of rubies or sapphires or diamonds? Am I disclosing properly as per international accepted best practices what the stone is? Where does it come from? How has it been treated? I think the treatments is, something that a lot of people would be surprised to discover what they're selling and how it has actually been treated. And then being responsible. Am I being responsible to my customer in terms of that disclosure? Am I being responsible to my employees, to my community at large? Before you sort of get into the next step of where am I getting these stones from and who is supplying it and how are they being responsible to their, to the source, and being responsible at the source as well. So it's a complicated conversation. We can have a separate webinar on it.
Yeah. And I think there is a lot to unpack here, Richa. But I want to dwell a little bit more on this. My next question is actually based on how brands and across industries tell these, they invest a lot in storytelling around responsible sourcing or these terms that you clarified for us. So, in your opinion, what are the ways in which the gem and jewelry industry and primarily at a retailer's end, which is where, the 12-inch counter space, you're talking to customers, how can a retailer tell such engaging stories?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think everyone has to figure out what type of storytelling works for their customers, because there will be certain markets and certain segments of customers who may not really care about it. And so then the question is, do you want to then go ahead and start educating that customer, which I think you should, because I think it's important. And also, what aspect do you want to start with? My advice would be, again, I'm not an expert, but coming from a point of view as, coming from the consumer's point of view, as I still consider myself a consumer to a large extent, is to keep it simple, really, because I think the more complicated the narrative, the more customer confusion it's going to create. So I feel like keep it simple, break it down, and also communicate why you are talking about it and why is it important. And and what you're saying is going to probably lead to more questions coming from the consumer side. So you need to also think about that and be prepared for that. And also be honest in saying that, this is what we understand and this is what we are focused on. And this is the aspect that we are still working on. And this is what we ourselves are trying to demystify or trying to understand. And so all of these things are, I think, it's a journey. And I think no one really, has all the answers. I feel also you have to be careful in, I see a lot of people doing this. Okay, I'm sourcing it from here. I see this more in North America, where there's a story created of this is where I'm getting it from and this community here. But then what is the impact, of this pipeline that is created? So I think sometimes one also has to think that you can't necessarily in today's day and age get away with creating a shallow storyline just to tick the boxes. It's because you have to then be prepared for a consumer to start digging deeper into that story and be exposed, right? So I think it's important to, whatever you do, be really clear in why you are doing it, first of all, and what it means and how you want to communicate it.
So if I kind of summarize, Richa, that when you're telling stories around sourcing and efforts that have gone into it across the supply chain. Be honest, be genuine, keep it personal. Tell the consumer why
Yeah.
you're doing it, and always make an attempt at educating the consumer. I think those are great takeaways for I think the audience. So, um,
I think, sorry if I may just jump in. I mean, besides GIA, a lot of what I've learned in this industry has been from the industry, has been having those 1 hour, 2 hour conversations with an emerald manufacturer or a merchant or a jeweler. And when the pandemic happened and I was, in Singapore for 2 years, couldn't step out, I bought things on WhatsApp, right? And I bought it from people who I trusted, who had put in the effort to educate me, right? And had been really honest with me. Those are the people that I bought things from, like this emerald necklace. I bought it on WhatsApp. So in 2021.
beautiful, beautiful. Great. So the key takeaway for I think many of the entrepreneurs here is that if you invest in storytelling, there are consumers here waiting for you. So Richa, my next question is building on one of the aspects that Apurva sir mentioned in your introduction. So you have been doing storytelling through various avenues, and the book is just another cap in the feather. Uh, and that's a unique intersection that you have of the content that you create, which is education and entertainment. Um, so my opinion is that a strong knowledge of your subject is definitely important, but there is a flair of sharing these compelling narratives, which is crucial, especially on social media today. Um, so I want to ask you, what's your advice for the jewelry designers and to a large extent anyone in the audience who's in the gem and jewelry industry? How can they tell engaging stories to consumers?
Right. I think when we first spoke about this, you were also talking about content creators, or is that another question?
No, this is about. Sorry, that's another question, Richard.
That's a different question. Okay, then I won't answer that now. So we stick to people who are designers, but I think the biggest struggle with jewelry designers with social media is copycats, right? It's something that I get asked a lot. Like, how do I share my designs? How do I share my products and, not have them copied? And believe me, I've had my content copied and it's still copied left, right, and center. And I feel that there are 2, 3 ways to address that. One is you have to make peace with the fact that your brand story has to be really strong. And you have to also understand that the consumer who is buying something from you is buying, and someone who's buying something from a copycat, the person who's buying from the copycat is anyway not your client, because. So I'll give you an example of an Indian company, Gem Palace, based in Jaipur. They have created iconic designs, continue to, and the designs are copied left, right, and center, right? Viren Bhagat is another example from India. And there are people who copy his designs or they change things around. And clients of Gem Palace love buying things, not just what they are buying, but because of the fact that they are buying something which is from Gem Palace or something which comes from Viren Bhagat, right? People who buy the copycat are not their customers. So that's one where, you have to then take that decision and accept it. But the reason is because those two examples that I shared are really powerful, strong brands. The brand story is really strong. The other way to do it, if you still don't want to share your designs on social media, is talk about yourself. Talk about what inspires you. Some designers are inspired by architecture, a certain type of architecture, and talk about the creation process. So there are ways to share videos and visuals of a piece of jewelry being made and show facets of that jewelry without showing the piece itself, or just the way you do the storytelling, you create a video which is like set, where you have a model in a jungle scene or all sorts of things. There are so many creative people out there who can create visuals where you're getting a sense of the jewel without too much of it being given away. And I think a lot of people have in the last 2 years started developing and understanding and experimenting. I mean, we can sit and talk about it. The other problem with content creators, myself included, is overthinking. And I will sometimes sit with a post and I have to just tell myself, like, stop overthinking and just post the damn thing. And, you don't need to necessarily, and sometimes I will spend days over creating the perfect post and it doesn't resonate with the audience. Versus, I remember this post I did. It was, we had a wedding in the family. We'd taken out this Kundan Meena jewelry and some of it was looking tarnished. And my mother took this giant eraser and she was erasing this Kundan, Polki Kundan necklace. And I just grabbed my phone and took a video with her complaining, my hands don't have a manicure. It's horrible. I said, no, it's okay. This is great. And it was like a 30-second video that I posted and it got like 1 million views because it was real. It resonated with the audience. So, you have to also sometimes put yourself in the shoes of the viewer. I mean, we're living in an age of instant gratification where while you're watching something on Netflix, you're also scrolling on your phone and people are doing 3 things at the same time. So how do you catch that person's attention? It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Oh, wow.
Sorry, I give really long answers to, I feel like I need to edit my answers and just give you like shorter answers. Please feel free to cut me off.
No, Richa, I think this was great. I mean, there is a lot for the audience for us to learn in this. Just building on that question, Richa. Now, what would be your advice for content creators? Now, I know there are few people that I have interacted, few students from who are GI alumni now, and they've shown a keen interest in creating content, becoming influencers in the gem and jewelry industry space. What is your advice for them?
I mean, I think so first of all, I'm going to keep it real. And so some people in the audience may not like my answer, so I apologize. But, I think you have to first be clear on why you're doing this, right? I mean, if why you want to become a content creator or why you're doing this is basically to become an influencer, to start monetizing the account, I feel like that in itself is a false start. And because the problem is, when I think about, why I started was, there was no business plan, there was no strategy. I never in my wildest dreams thought that this would be happening or that this account would go anywhere. It was basically, my Instagram account was created to be an online scrapbook. The storytelling of edutainment that you spoke about earlier came about because I was trying to create these posts and create a digital scrapbook for myself and trying to figure out how can I remember the geology of how Zambian emeralds are created. And so I created this love story between dark, handsome rock called talc magnetite schist and a beautiful pegmatite, and they fall in love. And, I created this love story and I created a post out of it. And that was my way so that I remember it, right? And I feel that you need to be, and the reason why it resonated with people was because there was this sense of authenticity to the content, right? And not to say that I'm a genius and I did this marvelous thing. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say that authenticity, perfection is overrated. You got to keep things real. And I feel that when you come from a place where I want to monetize and I want to become an influencer and make a lot of money, it's it's really, you will tend to then look at people who are successful as content creators, and you will tend to then try and copy what they do. And the minute you get into that copying rut, you've lost the plot, because the problem with copying is that it becomes very difficult to develop your own unique style from that, right? So you need to start from why you're doing it. What is it that you can bring that is new? What is it that you can do? Because there are people who are really successful at this, but you can't be that person because that spot is already taken. So all you can do is be the best you, and bring something fresh to the conversation, bring something fresh to the table that someone hasn't seen before. And be ready to work for free. I worked without charging anyone anything for years, right? Because I wasn't creating content with that in mind. I had the 20 years of corporate life behind me, so I could afford to do that as well. And even today, a lot of the content that I create on Instagram is not paid for. Majority of it is not paid for. So I think one has to also be real. I tell people, don't give up your day job, because it's important. And be aware that this, in the initial couple of years, is not going to be the bread and butter.
That's interesting.
You want to create something real and genuine and long lasting.
Sustainable.
Not ways to cheat. but that's not the type of conversation we're here to have.
Thank you for those insights. Richa, I'm now going to take a little pivot and ask you a question about your experience about gem journeys. And through this, what I want to understand is, now you might have come across several international and national legacy brands while you were doing these gem journeys. Now, what, according to you, are those core values or elements that perpetuate the legacy of a brand across generations?
I think there's so many. I think the first thing is, I feel for any brand, I think most companies in this industry, whether they are gemstone manufacturers or jewelry brands, are legacy, are multi-generational. And I think at the core of it is self-realization, understanding and knowing who you are and what makes you tick and what resonates with your customers. And so I think that is important as a first step, right? Because you want to protect the core. The other thing, I sort of think about, I was a second generation entrepreneur in the aviation and tourism space. And I still, to some extent, think of myself as that. And when the new generation comes into the organization, they want to make their mark. They want to do something which they want to bring a contribution. And I think it's important to carve something out as a project for them to do independently, which doesn't sort of mess with the core values of what the brand is. And I think slowly build on that. And I think for the new generation coming in, it's important to also realize and come to the organization from a place of respect, right? You have to also approach and say that, okay, yes, I am full of new ideas. I have this fancy degree from GIA or wherever they have it from. And there's a lot, or I've just come out of design school and there's a lot that I want to fix. But at the same time, also come to the organization from a place of respect and understanding that this has worked for decades, right? And what is it that has worked? And I talk to your consumers, talk to your clients, and, go to your top 20, 30 clients and ask them, why do you keep coming back to me for this particular thing? What about me works for you? Why do you like us? And, you might be surprised by the answer. It may not be something that you may have thought about.
And there is so much to unpack in that, honestly. Um, the fact that you spoke about self-realization and protecting the core and adding to the legacy by choosing a project which doesn't affect the core. I think those are great things which entrepreneurs, when they go back to their family businesses, the multi-generational businesses, which in our industry is quite common. I think there'll be a lot for them to kind of learn and implement. Richa, now I want to ask you a very personal question. Now, it may seem a little controversial, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless. Uh, if you could wear only one piece of jewelry for the rest of your life, what piece would it be and why?
Right. Okay. First of all, I think it's criminal to wear only one piece of jewelry for the rest of your life. And if I'm Indian, and if we go by our ancient scriptures, right? The Vedas or different ancient Indian scriptures talked about, and I recently gave a talk on this at Gem Genève on the Indian jewelry culture, and our ancient scriptures talked about the concept of saguna and nirguna, where, and this was a conversation I had with Dr. Usha Balakrishnan, who I'm sure you know of, is a very eminent jewelry historian. And we were discussing this, and she was saying that, it basically comes from this direction from our ancestors that a body that is devoid of jewelry is, in a sense, devoid of personality and character, and it's invisible. And how a body becomes visible is by embellishing it with jewelry from head to toe. And, thousands of years ago, our ancestors were dressing themselves up in jewels, if we go way back before gold, in organic material, fish scales, shells, feathers. And then as diamonds and pearls and gold came about, every part of the body. So I think talking about wearing only one piece of jewelry for the rest of your life is really criminal. And I shall not report you to the gem gods, but but it's something. I think it's ridiculous, and we shouldn't be talking about this. It's blasphemy.
Fair enough. All right. Maybe a better question. I have a better question. I'm sorry if I offended you or anyone else by asking that question. Especially in a circle like this, I shouldn't be asking this. But my next question to you, Richa, is what is your favorite colored gemstone and why? And you know what? I'll actually do you one better. I have two questions for you, and you choose which you want to answer. So, what is your favorite colored gemstone and why? Question number one. And question number two, which not so popular color gemstones do you like the most and why? Now, you can take the pick.
Okay. Well, it's very difficult to pick one.
I was about to say, I'll take both if you like.
Please. Yeah. So now I'm going to answer both questions just because it gives me an opportunity to talk about more than one stone. If I really like hand on heart, I would have to say my favorite is emerald. And I think anyone who has gone and on my account knows this about me. I talk about emeralds all the time. And I'm wearing emeralds right now. And I think the reason... Oh, sorry, you had to say something, Apurv?
Yeah. Those of you who get an opportunity to meet Richa, she'll give you her visiting card, which is shaped in the form of a cut emerald. So I think that speaks for her passion for the stone. So over to you.
For sure. I don't know if I have one handy to show right now, but it's not important. But I think emerald also, because I feel that if there is a gemstone that is as close a reflection of humanity, it's probably an emerald. I feel the color is so beautifully reflective of nature, and the inclusions inside an emerald, I feel like we as humans are like an emerald, because like an emerald is full of fissures and fractures. We are full of fractures and fissures, which tend to increase over time as we go through our processes, our stressful moments. And I feel we're hard and soft like an emerald in many respects. So I feel from um, a poetic, philosophical point of view as well, there are many reasons why emerald is my favorite gemstone. But a very close, like if my love of emeralds is here, my love of spinels and garnets is like just over here. And I call them cubic cousins, because I love spinels and I love garnets because they are they belong to the cubic crystal system, which is the same family as a diamond, is the same crystal structure as that of a diamond, and but they have color. So I feel like stones like spinels and garnets are the perfect love child of colored stones and diamonds in that respect. And I'm wearing a spinel right now, and I mean, just look at this. There's no special lighting in my room right now. There's a lamp a little far away, and it's just the computer light. But this is a Mahenge spinel from Tanzania, and it's like a light catcher. I find that they just grab light from whatever little light source that's there and just reflect it back to your eye. And garnets are the same. These are Savarite garnets, and a lot of people think they're emeralds, but they're not. And so I feel also that I like stones that don't need to be treated. And spinels, of course, you can treat a spinel, but for the large part, spinels and garnets are available in a variety of colors, and they don't need to be treated. So I think those are my top.
Could you talk a little bit about the brooch that you're wearing?
Oh,
It's very
where
It's a nice.
this is a vintage. It's a vintage. It's a vintage Boucheron brooch. You see if I can take it out. And yeah, I mean, I think it has turquoise, and my nails are horrible. I apologize, but it's a vintage piece. I can't quite remember which time period it's from. Maybe 40s, maybe 50s, but um, but I mean, this is also, I think, a great example of what jewelry can be and should be. It should be playful. It should be fun. I didn't need to wear the brooch. I could have just stuck to this. But I feel like putting a little tortoise on your lapel or on your dress is just like having a little bit of fun with jewelry. And why not? Everything doesn't, we have to not take ourselves and take life too seriously as well. In the long run, we're all going to be dead. So, we can sit and debate the value and the long-term value of so many precious things, but in the long run, we're all gone. So buy what you can afford and have fun with it and wear it. And don't just keep it in your locker.
And certainly, this is like a good comeback to me for asking you that question: what one piece of jewelry would you like to wear? So, thank you for that, Richa.
Well, in terms of questions, there are a couple of requests from the audience. One of them is, while we were talking about jewelry influencers and what is it that you can bring onto the plate, I would that there is a comment from Arpita saying, "Can you give us more such examples?" I would request Arpita to probably elaborate a little on. Was she talking about more examples of the different things or the ideas of various videos that we can put on our Instagram, or was it something else that she was?
No, I'll tell you. I think she punched this question when Richa was talking about that particular piece of jewelry. She clicked a live clip with someone's hand, with the eraser. She was trying to clean the jewelry, and that is what made the
Right.
story itself. So when she was telling that story, I think around that time, Arpita punched this comment that please tell us more such stories. Arpita, am I Was I right in reading it? Yes.
Yes,
Very
she's
nice.
confirmed that. Yeah.
Sure.
Great. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor. So, yes, Richa.
I think in terms of examples, I mean, there's so many examples. And I think also what happens is that things that I was doing maybe 3-4 years ago on social media, on Instagram, is very different from what I'm doing today. And I feel like there are things that work at a certain time, and then there are things that don't work. And one has to also be aware of that. I mean, for example, I think one of the first campaigns I did, which really resonated with the audience, was following the journey of a rough emerald from start to finish. So from its rough state through the cutting and polishing process. And it was, each post just featured one stone. And, it worked for that time period, which was, I think it was 2018 when I did that. During 2020, 2021, I used to do IG lives every week. I think we were all sort of stuck at home and, craving gemological experiences and missing stones and missing jewelry. And so a lot of that happened at that time. I don't do that many of them today because one has realized that people are traveling, life is open, the pandemic is behind us. And so people don't necessarily have the time to sit and watch something in that moment and would probably like to watch it later on at their leisure. So I think in terms of examples, there are so many examples and I don't necessarily have all the answers. I feel that even I am learning today because the reason is because my audience might be different from an audience or a community that someone else might have, right? So a lot of these communities that get created on social media get created organically, right? And they change. So it depends on who is the audience and what is it that works for them. And sometimes if I try to do something which is, my audience is definitely rooted in an addiction to colored gemstones, because that's what they love and that's what I love, and that's what, color is something that, resonates with them. So I know that, and which is great because that's what I love to do as well. But also vintage and antique jewelry. That's the other thing that I love. And I think when you're doing something that you love, it works and it connects and it leads to the creation of these communities.
We have another question from Shailaja, who's asking, in 2023 and the next few years, probably, which color gemstone do you think will gain more popularity?
Wow. I mean, if I had a crystal ball, but I think there are a couple of stones. I mean, I recently wrote an article on the state of the color gemstone industry for JNA magazine. And there are a couple of things that came out of the research related to this article. I mean, definitely emeralds, I would say globally, are the most popular colored gemstones. But besides emeralds, if you're looking towards the future, and we're also seeing the price of colored gemstones increase, especially after the pandemic, I would say that based on what I've seen, what's going to be popular, I feel like anything which is top grade, anything which is top quality and untreated will always have a buyer and will always stand the test of time. I think stones like spinels and tsavorite, which is the grossular green garnet, and spessartite garnet, which is the mandarin garnet or orange garnet, these two stones are also having a moment. Going forward, I think pearls are having a moment right now. And the reason why pearls are having a moment right now is also because when the price of gold increased, a lot of jewelers went in and bought a lot of pearls to use pearls as an alternative to set stones instead of using so that they don't have to use too much of gold. So there are reasons why pearls are having a moment, opals are having a moment right now. And I think as consumers are educating themselves, and they're also learning and understanding what is quality. And so it's also a process of evolution where they're evolving into more discerning consumers. But I think, and in different parts of the planet, in India for sure, emeralds are number one, right? And it really has reached that stage where it doesn't even matter what the quality of the emerald is as long as it's green, which, I don't want to judge, but I think people also then have to understand that certain quality will not stand the test of time and only the top grade will. In places like North America, where the jewelry culture is definitely connected very closely to fashion. So because of this bright pink of Valentino and some of the other, this bright neon pink being really popular at the moment in fashion, pink stones are really popular at the moment. Pink sapphires, pink tourmalines, quite popular in North America at the moment. So I think different stones connect with different audiences because while we are one world, we are also very different culturally, East and West, and even within the East, different parts of Asia and different parts of Europe and the UK and North America and South America. I mean, in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that, as the price of rubies, emeralds, and sapphires in a certain top quality has increased astronomically, people are also looking for alternatives. So someone who wants to create something with red or with pink, and is not able to, and is finding the price of sapphires too high, will look for a replacement and will look to tourmalines, right? Or look to spinels. And so or will look for a green replacement, might look at garnets, right? And so I feel like when that happens, then those stones become more popular and it seems as if they're more in demand, which they become more sought after as a result.
I have a question for you, Richa. From your experience of mine visits, do you have any memorable incident, something that you really cherish from your mine visits, or something? And it could be opposite, something very challenging during any of your mine visits.
I think I can share like something negative maybe a little bit first before I share the positive. And I think this was really early on in 2014 or a little before, when I went for a recce to Sri Lanka. And I, again, knew no one in the industry. And I was traveling with my friend. And she had a contact who had a contact. So she was like, let's go meet this guy. And long story short, we landed up in this situation where she and I were in a room with these 13 men, and with the room, it was basically like a house where we were thinking we were walking into like an office, but it was like a house. And we walked into this situation where there were these 13 local dealers sitting there, 13 men sitting there, very intimidating. And the two of us were taken to the far end of this apartment, into this room, which was the furthest away from the door. And we're sitting there in this situation where we're not feeling comfortable, but we had to sit there for an hour and a half and see every single stone that these 13 gentlemen who were sitting in this living room had brought. And it was intimidating and really scary at that time. And I think And it was a learning experience for me. I mean, we got out of that situation and nothing happened. But it was a learning experience because when people talk about traveling to mines or traveling to manufacturing centers, there's a lot of excitement around it. But I think you also have to be careful and realize that some of these places that you're going to, they're not necessarily tourist central. So you have to be very clear, especially when you're traveling as a woman, who you're going to see. Is this a safe situation? And take whatever precautions you need to take to make sure that you have that educational experience, but it's also a safe environment. And I learned that quite early on from that incident. And I mean, one of the most memorable visits was definitely to Africa. And in March 2019, I had the opportunity to travel to the Kagem Emerald Mine, which is the world's largest emerald mine, and just standing on that, on their viewing platform and looking at this open pit, and just sort of staring into this 2 kilometer sort of expanse of where Zambian emeralds come from. I mean, it's magical. And I think to be at a mine physically, it's very difficult to describe that feeling because there's a certain intangible energy that is there. And I don't know if it's real or whether it's because you psychologically have this thing that you're there, so you're feeling it. But whatever it is, I think it's a very special energy. And people ask me, "Oh, do you go to this travel show and that travel show?" I'm like, you know what? I'm not one of those people who travels to the Hong Kong show or any of these other shows. There are very few I go to. I'd rather sort of pack my bags and go to a mine or go to like a manufacturing center and spend time with either a miner or a lapidary artist. Not to judge, not to say that traveling to a gem show is, I'm not trying to sit here in judgment, and but it's just a very different experience.
Wherein Shraddha has put a question that, are there any myths or misconceptions about colored gemstones that you often encounter?
I think that's a great question. I think the number one myth or misconception is that everything holds value over time, and and around origin. So consumers still feel that just because I'm buying a Colombian emerald, because it's Colombian, it's a good emerald, without understanding or realizing that what makes it a valuable emerald that's going to stand the test of time, or what makes it a valuable ruby, or which is going to stand the test of time, is not where it comes from, but the foundation or the fundamentals of value, which, as anyone who's done the GIA course knows, it's based on beauty, durability, and and rarity. So beauty is at the core. So only stones which are top grade will hold the test of time. And just because something is from Colombia or Burma, not to say that those stones don't hold the test of time, but even it can't just be origin. So that, I think, is the number one misconception when it comes to colored stones, where people are confusing the value matrix with origin labels. Yeah.
Moving on to the next question, how do you suggest one keeps updated with gem prices?
Oh my gosh, well, I'll go against what I just said a few minutes ago. I think that's the thing with colored gemstones as well, right? I mean, with diamonds, there's still more visibility as far as pricing is concerned. With colored gemstones, I think a lot of what people do in the industry is going to trade shows and just asking for prices. And how much is this for? How much is that for? And you see that on Instagram also. People are like, PP or price please. And of course, there are nicer ways to do that. But there are also tools that are available. Like there's the Gem Guide that is published. You can get membership of the Gem Guide. Google it, and there's some pricing published there. But I think most of what people do in the industry is going to shows and asking for pricing to get a sense of how much things are for. And it takes a while to get that sense. And you have to do it constantly. And I remember having a conversation with someone in Jaipur recently, and And, he was like, I haven't been to a trade show in a long time, and I need to get to a trade show because I need to update my prices. And I can't do that till I don't go to a show and I don't sort of go and ask for prices and get a sense of what the escalation has been. So I need to update mine. So that's fortunately or unfortunately the only way to do it.
The next question, which author, this is from Karan, which author do you look up to the most?
There are so many. I mean, honestly, I have reached a stage in my house where I can't buy another book because I have already expanded my bookshelf beyond. I need to get another house now if I have to get more books. But I think different authors offer different things. In terms of colored gemstones, I like buying old books. So, I like buying old books from rare book dealers. So, and I also, in terms of colored stones, I think Richard Hughes is a great author for colored stones, for rubies and sapphires. There's so many of them. I like learning about the history of colored stones. So I like Derek J. Content, who has written a lot about historical collections and the history of colored stones. I feel like I'm forgetting someone at the moment. But again, different authors have written different books specializing in different colored stones. So I feel like people and books and gemstones enter your life when you most need them. So my journey of finding these books and finding these teachers has also been quite organic. Before, when I started, I used to just go to the library in Singapore. I used to go to the National Library in Singapore and check out a book and bring it home and spend evenings not watching Netflix, but sitting and studying that book cover to cover. And I did that before the Instagram account. I did that for years, right? And there's so much information that is available online. And I think the GIA alone is such a vast and in-depth repository of knowledge. I mean, so many times I'm writing an article on a amolite at the moment, which is a one source biogenic gemstone found only in Canada. And, and I'm sitting in, I just Googled amolite GIA and came across this wonderful article, which has some interesting insights into the stone. So there's a lot. And if you go even to GEMA, the Gemological Institute of Great Britain, they have an archive of old articles on their website. Similarly, so many other institutes have that, and it's freely available. You don't need to be a member of anything to have access to that. So a lot of my understanding, and it's continuous even today, has come from, like, if I'm writing a story about the discovery of sapphires in Madagascar, I actually went and spent a lot of time reading old articles which were written when those sapphires came out, or old articles written by people like Julius Pesch on Sandwana emeralds and the history of that mine, right? So I feel like there's so much out there. You just need to start Googling and start searching and follow your own sort of path in terms of enriching yourself with knowledge.
So the next question is from Nancy, who says, hi ma'am, good to hear from you. Her question is, what's your take on antique jewelry? Do you think there's a demand in India market or more in abroad?
So thanks for the question, and nice to see you here. Nancy is part of my Insta tribe. So happy to be here. But I think antique jewelry, it's definitely more international than in India. Having said that, I feel that trading, buying and selling of antique jewelry in India has always been behind closed doors. It's always had some sort of social stigma attached to it in a way where it's selling jewelry has always historically been seen as something that you do or that a family does in their time of need. That I think has changed and is changing. I think, and that's coming from watching the international antique jewelry market and watching this news coming from Christie's and Sotheby's about these jewelry collections. And I think auction houses in India like Saffron Art and like Asta Guru are both doing a wonderful job in raising awareness about that. Of course, Indian jewels have been sold, but have been sold privately. Um, so I think, but I think it's changing. I think a lot of this is becoming more visible now. So it doesn't mean that it will never existed in India. I think it's just becoming more visible now. And I think, and I personally welcome it. I think it's fantastic because I feel jewels are like time capsules of that period, and not just of that period and its history, or of stones that were discovered during that time, but also of jewelry making techniques that don't exist today, or that may be too expensive to replicate. And so I think it's important to look at the antique and the vintage market. And it's the biggest gemstone mine in the world. The antique and vintage jewelry segment is the biggest mine in the world because it's the secondary source of colored stones.
Before that, I'll take this question from Pallavi. I heard about your work with Marvel movie, Infinity Stones. Could you tell us about your journey about it?
That was actually, thank you for that question, Pallavi. That was like my first paid gig. It was in 2018, and the Avenger movie had just come out. So the Art Science Museum in Singapore co-curated an exhibition with Marvel Studios on the Avengers. Basically, it was this massive exhibition which was in Singapore at the Art Science Museum for like, I think, 6 months or something like that. And by that time, I think a lot of people in Singapore who were attentive to colored stones or jewelry kind of knew about my work and my storytelling on Instagram. So the deputy director at that time, she approached me to whether I'd be interested in curating the Infinity Stones section for the exhibition. So which basically meant they wanted me to create content about pre-colonial history of colored gemstones and draw some parallels with the movie and the pop culture of the movie, and also to source rough gemstones to create a physical display of infinity stones that go inside the gauntlet. And so I, drew parallels between the infinity gauntlet and the concept of Navratan, where if you think about it, it's really the same, where each stone represents the energy of a planet, and you wear this 9-gem formation to draw upon the energy of all these 9 planets and to be all powerful, which is basically what the villain in the Avenger movies was trying to do in getting these stones and putting them in this infinity gauntlet. And I feel in some respects, ancient Indian scriptures have inspired a lot in pop culture. You can see so many parallels and reflections of ancient Indian philosophy and scriptures in modern movies like Star Wars or
Sci-fi, yes.
Right? So I felt that, so I created the physical display for them, created content that was published in that section at the museum, and I also then put together a presentation which I gave to members of the Art Science Museum at that time. But that was like my first paid gig, which was really delightful to have. And